Hello and welcome back everybody. In my last video I talked about wanting to do some kind of shorter challenge run next, but somehow that didn't seem to be working out like he initially intended to. Soul Hackers 2 is still shorter than most other games I've done so far, so I guess it still kinda counts. Anyways, today we're going to find out if you can beat Soul Hackers 2 on hard difficulty using only the starting demons. That basically means we will be stuck with Pixie, Poltergeist, Anmaraki and Hari of Inaba throughout the entire game, and everybody who played this game can probably imagine what kind of struggles we're diving into. Now, before we're getting started, let's quickly go through the run's rules. First of all, only starting demons are allowed to be used. We're not allowed to equip any other demons whatsoever. We are allowed to recruit new demons and carry them in our stock. However, they are not going to be equipped at any point of the game. The difficulty we're playing on is going to be hard. I did think for a moment about even going very hard, but not only does that increase the enemy damage and decrease yours even more, it also doesn't let you use any items, and that is probably a little too much since we're going to be relying on items quite a bit, so we'll stick to hard. Don't worry, it's already going to be brutal enough the way it is. Also, as always, no New Game Plus, we start off a fresh file, and lastly we're also going to try and achieve the game's true ending. In this game that's not necessarily a problem since the final boss will be the same one regardless which ending you'll get. The only thing that's changing is that we have to beat all the Soul Matrix bosses from floor 1 to 4. And one more thing, since this is still a rather new game, spoiler warning. There will be quite a few spoilers throughout the course of the run, so if you haven't played the game yet and want to remain unspoiled, better think twice before watching this one. For everybody still watching, let's dive right into the action before this intro becomes way too long yet again. We start the game, get to meet Ringo and Fig, and our first objective is to protect two men from certain death, Ichiro Honda and Arrow. Since my protection services are about as good as my work ethic, we arrive way too late and Arrow's already dead. But fear not, because in this game, penetrating someone's soul can bring them back into life. And so Arrow's now back, and we already got half our party assembled. To be honest, there isn't really much to talk about in the beginning of the game, since at this point we're still playing like it's intended to. We go through the first couple of fights, get a few tutorials while at it, and shortly afterwards fight the first boss, RS. Not so Slim Shady doesn't have anything on us though, so a couple of turns later the battle is already over again. Fig is absorbing the Covenant floating around, and we deeply dive into the dead lady on the ground and tickle her just like we did with Arrow to bring her back into life. 3 out of 4 party members already acquired. Good start, I'd say. In the safe house we learn about Iron Mask, the other Covenants, and decide to look for Saizo, another holder of them. We go into a back street and find Saizo dead. Worst bodyguards ever. At this point you already know the theme. Penetrate Saizo's soul, bring him back to life, and complete our party, and therefore also the usable demons for the remainder of the game. All the penetrating gets Ringo dizzy, she passes out, and we have to go to the Soul Matrix for the first time to get her back to normal again. Before we do that though, we make a short trip through town to meet all the important people and places. One of the most important being Tara the Compsmith. Since we will be stuck with our starting demons throughout the entire game, this is one of the most important places to strengthen our party. At this point you don't really have a lot of upgrades available yet, but we'll get what's already doable before making our way into the Soul Matrix. We make our way through Arrow's first sector until we reach the end and try to fight the first Soul Matrix boss, Takemi Nakata. Luckily Anmaraki has access to Torakaja, which is pretty much the only buff we can apply via skills at all. Arrow does have access to Sukunda, which is nice, but I'd rather have something like Tarunda or Rakunda, but beggars can't be choosers, I guess. Takemi Nakata is only weak to fire, so while Melody is the only one that can hit a weakness, she also has to keep up Torakaja throughout the fight. After a couple of turns, he also summons 2 Seronubs that do damage and can also heal the boss. Luckily though, those are weak to electricity, and since both Ringo and Saizo can use Seo, getting a decent amount of Savage stacks is much easier for a little while. Other than that, again, there isn't really much to talk about here. Do damage, heal, keep your buffs up, and eventually the boss goes down and the battle is won on the first try. Even though I was never really in danger of game overing here, it was a nice preview of what's to come since the battle took what felt like forever. Another thing worth mentioning here is that once your demons learn their last skill, further experience for them gets greatly reduced, so they're going to fall behind the party's level more and more as the game progresses. Once the boss is down, we also unlock access to the other party member's soul matrix. Back in the safe house, we're starting to look for the remaining covenants and therefore Mangetsu, since he has the last covenant that is not in possession of Iron Mask yet. Rumor has it he's living in the subway, but Fix still needs to track him down before we can get there. We also go to the Robber Realm for the first time and give good old Victor a little visit. Fusing demons in this playthrough is not going to be that important, considering we're not allowed to use them anyways, but we'll still level demons passively in order to get their gift once they learn the last skill. Mystiques especially are going to be very important throughout the entire run, since we don't have any other way to boost our magic damage, but more on that later. We also go back to the Soul Matrix again in the meantime to do the first floor from every party member, and also complete the first couple of quests in the process. This is where one of the first recurring problems starts to turn up more often. We have to run from certain enemies because we cannot hit a weakness, and the fight would drag on way too much without the extra damage. Even though the game clearly wants you to focus on force magic with Saizo, his starting demon doesn't have any force spells, but instead has Zeo, which is kinda funny considering Saizo can't even equip any electricity mystiques at all. So yeah, if an enemy is only weak to force or ruin, we don't have any way to hit a weakness, which is basically why we skip those encounters for the most part, at least for now. We also stop by De La Mancha regularly to buy some of the limited items, the herb sake and the portable first aid kit. You can only buy one of those and then need to wait until they are restocked, but those are incredibly important since items are literally the only means to heal the entire party in this run. You can also get AoE healing items at the Yin Yang Palace, but unlike the items in De La Mancha, those heal for a certain percentage, so for now the fixed ones here are still more useful, especially considering the herb sake heals each party member for 200 HP, which is almost 75% of the party's current max HP. Once we're done with all the current side quests, the party has a level of 15, so now we're ready to tackle the first Soul Matrix bosses, starting with Melchizedek. I completely butchered that again. Anyways, he's the boss on Melody's floor 1. He's weak to guns and also electricity attacks, which is already a good start considering we can hit a weakness with 3 party members and therefore also stack up Sabbaths rather easily. Unfortunately, he has counter, so occasionally he will counter gun attacks with a physical attack of his own. His somersault attack still hits pretty hard and almost one-shots a party member from full HP. The angels here are rather annoying as well, considering they like to buff the boss with Tsukukasha and can also hit the party members with their Zen attack. Eventually, some party members will also get wiped due to a somersault, but luckily we have a couple of revival beats to bring them back into battle. Other than that, again, there isn't really much worth mentioning. Keep your attack buff up, debuff the boss's accuracy, heal up regularly, and eventually win the fight. First try victory, and even though the battle was pretty challenging, it was actually not as hard as I first thought it might be. And since we're already at it, let's continue with the last Soul Matrix boss. Next up is Saizo's part with the fight against Dionysus. Strategy is pretty much the same as before. Taro caution the party, Secunda the boss, and go to work. Considering Arrow is the only party member that can hit a weakness with ice, DPS is rather low throughout the entire fight. Luckily, this gives both Ringo and Saizo the option to heal when necessary without losing out on too much damage. Miragi does a solid amount of damage, but with 2 party members potentially trying to heal up every turn, it is not that big of an issue. The battle doesn't actually become a problem until he starts using Drunken Shower, which is an AoE ruin attack that can either poison or put your party members to sleep. Poison can be healed with an item, and luckily Melody recovers from sleep on the second turn already. This could have been a rather big problem otherwise. Other than that, same thing as always. Keep up the heals, go to work, and eventually win the battle. We return to the game's main story for now, and enter the central line in search of Mangetsu. Not too long after entering, we run into a summoner who's trying to squeeze some information out of a homeless, so naturally we interfere to help. Since we grinded quite a bit in the Soul Matrix, we are actually a few levels higher than the boss. Again, same strategy as before applies. Buff, debuff, and go to work. The summoner comes with a Kappa Tengu, who is weak to physical attacks. Combine that with the summoner being weak to ice, we can easily stack up Sabbaths, and not too long after the fight is already done again. Just like in the Soul Matrix earlier, there are quite a few battles that we have to run from, since the majority of the enemies are only weak to either Force or Ruin. Only having access to single target spells is already a problem, but if you combine that with not being able to hit two elements at all, this becomes a big issue rather quickly. The next mini-boss coming up is a set of two bugs, and this one is quite tricky. Their only weakness is fire, and since Melody is also responsible for keeping Tarkaja up, it's pretty hard to get decent amounts of damage in. They also like to use Rampage, which is a multi-hit physical attack that deals rather big amounts of damage to the party. Yet another issue though is their Eat Whole attack, which, even though it doesn't deal as much damage as Rampage does, it heals them up for quite some HP, and considering our damage output is rather low to begin with, this is actually a big problem. Luckily Secunda does good work, and quite a few attacks, including Eat Whole, miss a couple of times, giving us a good chance to get good amounts of damage in. The fight generally becomes much easier the moment the first box is down, since the incoming damage is much more manageable with only one enemy attacking every turn. Rampage still does quite some damage, but at this point we're not really in danger of game overing anymore. Heal up, buff debuff, and try to throw some weakness hits in, and eventually the fight is won. Considering how it started, I was actually rather surprised that this was a first try victory, but hey, I'll take it. We continue on making our way through Central Line until the very last part. Technically we could fight the boss now, but considering the party's only level 19, the boss is 20, and we only have our starting demons equipped, it's probably a wiser choice to grind some more. During that grind we also get access to our first Sabbath skills. Those are going to be very useful since we can still activate those without having to equip the demon carrying it. Some of those have real nice effects like AoE heals, buffs, debuffs, status elements, and some more. Once we get to level 22, we return to the safe house to heal up and prepare for the next boss battle. Our meal of choice are Sancho's sweet potatoes. Those raise your intelligence and therefore damage in battle. Later on we will get some more useful ones, but for now this is all we have, and honestly, it's actually pretty good. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but they do make quite a difference, especially on longer fights, so we'll happily take those. Once preparation is over, we return to the central line and get interrupted by Era's old buddy Kaburagi, and the next boss battle begins. Kaburagi himself is only weak to ice, while the adds are weak to fire and lightning. We start the battle as always by doing the amounts of buffs and debuffs that we can, and also get some first damage in. Leon and Sita puts a veil on Kaburagi that gives him ice resistance, so ideally we take her out first. Unfortunately Melody has to both apply Tarkaja and also hit fire regularly, so getting the damage in is not so easy. Kaburagi also attacks twice each turn and deals a lot of damage with his gun attacks. Combine that with Leon and Sita doing Lullaby, which is an AoE ruin spell that can also inflict sleep, well, you can already guess how messy this battle is going to become. Oh, and if Leon and Sita isn't already a problem because of the sleep, she also uses Media every other turn to heal everybody, which is probably even worse. Saizo is mostly responsible for healing, while Ero tries to waste Kaburagi's turns with Secunda, since he will always negate the debuff first before actually attacking. After a few turns, Ringo is able to take out Kurama Tengu, which makes the incoming damage slightly easier to deal with, though we are still far off from being safe. Once Leon and Sita is finally out, Kaburagi also becomes vulnerable to ice again, so at this point we're trying to squeeze as much damage into him as possible. At that point, he also goes into Overpower mode, which he will always follow up with Execution, a rather strong AoE almighty attack, so guarding with the party members is going to be very important. Afterwards, it's going back to work again, but as you can see, my damage is still rather low for the most part. After a few turns, he will also resummon his allies again. Once again, Leon and Sita needs to be taken care of as quickly as possible, so we can resume doing decent damage on Kaburagi. Kurama Tengu at this point is mostly here to build up stacks since it's weak to electricity. Unfortunately, Lullaby is still a huge problem and can turn the battle into the boss's favor rather quickly. Luckily I still had an original flame, which is basically a full party heal. And if we didn't struggle enough already, Kaburagi is already preparing for his next execution attack. At this point I decided to throw a Rakukaja Pearl to give the entire party a defense buff, hoping we can get through the execution attack that way without suffering too much. Even though it hit real hard, it didn't actually wipe anybody, so that was definitely a good call. Leon and Sita is gone again, and we focus back onto Kaburagi and use Kurama Tengu to stack up some more bonus Sabbath damage. Eventually Kurama Tengu goes down, and Leon and Sita gets resummoned, but at this point Kaburagi is pretty much down though, so we focus our attacks on him and get his last HP down and win the fight. Another one completed first try, but damn, this is way harder than I expected it to be, and I'm sure it won't get easier anytime soon. Anyways, Kaburagi just died in Ero's arms tonight as we continue on to find Mangetsu's secret library. Apparently he's been stalking Ero, so the party decides to meet with another one of Ero's buddies, Raven, since he might know a little more about this situation. We go to the Komodori orphanage, meet Raven and the orphans, and learn more about the Covenants. Fig also finds Mangetsu as he's hiding in subway line 14, so we are off into our next dungeon. Before doing that though, we're about to go on another shopping trip. The pizza place now offers Dexterous Pescatora, which increases our bonus attack damage from Sabbath, so that is what we will mostly be using for boss battles from now on. In the Robo realm, we also meet the mysterious girl that lets us exchange unneeded mystiques for mystic wards, which we can then use to buy new mystiques for our party. At the moment there isn't a whole lot we can do here yet, but this place will become way more important than I first thought later on. We also unlock the first couple of commander skills for Ringo's comp. Unfortunately we don't have the necessary materials yet for the more useful ones, but those will be another game changer from here on now. We also go back into the Soul Matrix once again since we unlock the second floor on everybody, so we can gain a couple of levels here before continuing on with the main story. There isn't really a whole lot to say here since we don't have the necessary amount of soul levels to fight the bosses yet, so it's basically grabbing all the checkpoints and defeating enemies on the way in order to gain a few more levels. We also finally get access to Assassin Steps that lets Ringo dash and move much faster than normally. When I started this playthrough, Atlas didn't push out the update for auto dash and fast battles yet, so this was the only way to speed things up for now. Once we're done with everything, the party has a level of 28, which might just be enough for the next part. We also get the first commander skill, namely Auto Repair. This one only triggers randomly in battle, but it lets the party heal quite a bit of HP automatically for 3 turns. So this may be one of the most useful ones considering our healing options are very limited throughout the entire playthrough. With that out of the way, we enter subway line 14 in search of Mangetsu, and it doesn't actually take long until we run into the first boss battle, Ash, Saizo's former girlfriend, and we promptly engage into an encounter with her. Ash is the first boss to be weak to only force, and if you remember earlier, Saizo, the party member usually responsible for force magic, doesn't have any force magic on his starting demon, so yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Ash also summons a Lilim and later on a Basilisk. Luckily Lilim is weak to ice, so we can at least deal some kind of damage and also build up a small Sabbath stack. By the way, spoilers, this will not be a first try victory and you will shortly see why. Ash's companions love to inflict status elements such as Daze and Dread, and if you don't cure those quickly, Ash will follow it up with her special attack Ashes to Ashes, which is an already very strong almighty attack that deals extra damage if the party member is inflicted with an ailment. But even without that, she does huge amounts of damage with her regular attacks too. Blackout is a real strong AoE gun attack, and if you remember, Ringo is weak to gun damage, so yeah, managing that is a rather big problem. Luckily Lilim is down after a few turns, which makes the battle a little safer at this point since there is nobody to inflict ailments anymore. Since we barely have done any damage to Ash yet, we can now start to focus on her. Once Ash hits roughly 75% of her HP, Phase 2 starts and she starts getting 2 attacks each turn and also summons more adds. Basilisk luckily is weak to both physical and ice attacks, so by attacking with the right party members, we can have a consistent Sabbath stack pretty much every turn. A few turns later, she also resummons Lilim, and this is the point where the fight goes down the drain. Once resummoned, Lilim uses Frolic, which is an AoE version of the Daze spell she did earlier, and at this point it's basically RIP. Melody gets wiped and half of the party is inflicted with Daze. Recovering from this is a huge problem since we basically get attacked 4 times each turn at this point. Since I knew it wasn't gonna work out like that, I looked for different strategies. I went to Yin Yang Palace since I knew I could get elemental items there. The Frost Cliff, which deals AoE ice damage, would be real good here since both Basilisk and Lilim are weak to ice. Unfortunately, the needed materials, in particular the Avatar Shell, doesn't actually drop until the next area, right after the boss fight. Great game design. At least I was able to stack up on the single target version of it, and I also picked up Rakukasha Pearls since the defense boost would probably come in real handy as well. Once we were done with that, we went back in for attempt number 2. Starting strats are pretty much the same as in the first attempt. Try to survive, get rid of Lilim, and then go to work on Ashe. Unfortunately, this time around, we pushed Ashe into second phase before getting rid of Lilim, and this would come back to haunt me, as Lilim immediately goes for Frolic as soon as phase 2 starts. The AoE status elements are probably the worst part of this entire fight since AoE healing items aren't really a thing yet, and Ashe does ridiculous damage if you don't get rid of them quickly enough. I also started to use the Frost Epitaphs I bought earlier to get a higher Sabbath stack. Eventually we got rid of Lilim, but I still had huge problems maintaining heals, status elements, buffs, and damage, and yeah, at some point recovery is pretty much impossible. Lilim gets resummoned and eventually I throw the fight since this wasn't gonna work out like that at all. Again, I was on the lookout for a new strategy, and when I looked to Saphiro, I thought I found the solution. Saphiro sells Kaki headphones, which reduce the chance to get inflicted with several status elements, among those Daze, which we have so many issues with. Since those cost a fortune though, I decided to save on a different slot before buying them, so I could go back if needed, and that was actually a very smart idea, but let me show you why. Even though the Kaki headphones are supposed to lower the odds of getting inflicted with Daze, in reality things looked very different. I'm not sure if bosses have some kind of fixed rate to hit elements, but I didn't really feel any difference at all. In fact, I even went back and checked if I actually put the accessories on since I could not tell any different whatsoever to the couple of attempts before. So while that was a good idea in theory, it didn't work out at all, so we reload the save from earlier to not lose out on the money that we just spent. The party has a level of 28, so we are already 3 levels higher than the boss itself, but I was already halfway to level 29, so I figured it probably won't hurt grinding a bit more since experience was still kinda okay-ish, so we actually went all the way to level 30. Now being 5 levels higher than the boss, we went at it one more time. Strategy was similar to before. Make sure to wipe Lilim first, and then proceed to push Ashe into phase 2. At this point our damage output was also quite a bit higher and the incoming damage felt more manageable, so that was a better start for sure. When a party member gets dazed, heal quickly and continue on. Luckily in phase 1 Lilim doesn't seem to use Frolic yet. Once phase 2 starts, she summons Basilisk first. We will mostly ignore Basilisk other than getting additional Sabbath stacks since it is quite bulky and only does single target attacks anyways. Curing status elements is still important since Ashes to Ashes still hits pretty hard. At some point though, I decided to stop healing ailments since it would take too much time and some party members can actually withstand being one-shot occasionally. Taking out the ads only helps temporarily since they are resummoned after a few turns, but we actually need those for stack building since we can't hit the weakness on the boss, so it's not even that bad at all. At some point, the majority of the party was also out of MP due to being dazed. During a clutch moment, auto repair triggered. Unfortunately, Saizo got wiped the following turn, so while it was nice, it wasn't a huge advantage or anything. I also threw my last original flame in this fight. I'm usually rather careful about not wasting too many healing items, especially since we won't get access to B-chains for a long time, but this fight definitely justifies using them. In the end, it wasn't even necessary though, as one more attack was all I needed to end the fight. You don't actually have to fully beat her since the fight automatically ends once you get her into red bar, but whatever. After that mess of the boss battle, I'll take the victory. Also, as I'm going through those videos again, I face-palmed hard since I realized I never even used any of the Rakukasha pearls I got earlier. The defense buff could have probably made the battle quite a bit easier, so good job for me playing the game. You're a dumbass. Anyways, we continue on going through the dungeon, including a little barrier game that confused me more in my casual playthrough than I'd like to admit, until we reach the next mini-boss. Baphomet is weak to both ice and electricity, so building up stacks luckily isn't as big as an issue as it was before. The boss mostly uses fire attacks. Agilao does hurt quite a bit, but it's manageable for the most part. He also uses Makajima on, but luckily the status from it doesn't hit nearly as often compared to the Ash fight earlier. Once he starts using Concentrate is when things get dangerous though, since he likes to follow it up with Fire Breath, and with him getting 2 attacks each turn, it can get hairy very quickly. Ideally, Fire Breath either misses or the same party member gets hit multiple times, since it's easier to bring one back into battle than to heal everybody. Luckily, Baphomet doesn't have that much HP and we hit pretty hard, so we get him down relatively quickly. Overall, a brutal fight, but not nearly as bad as Ash that we went through just earlier. And that's pretty much all for Subway Line 14. We continue on until we run into Iron Mask and Zenon, who found Mangetsu before us and engage into yet another encounter. Luckily, this is a scripted fight that you can't win anyways, so just make sure to guard and stay alive until it's over. I did attack a few times since I wasn't 100% certain whether or not you need to attack to trigger the auto events to end the fight, but other than that, there isn't much worth mentioning here for the most part. Luckily, the party was able to seize Mangetsu's phone. Unfortunately, it's destroyed, but Fig might be able to recover some data from it. To find out more about Zenon, we visit Victor, who gives us information including that the only way to kill a Soma is during New Moon. We also visit the mysterious girl again, who transforms into a mysterious woman and now offers new mystiques, and here is one of the first major mistakes I did. Technically, I could buy mystiques that offer a tier 2 elemental spell now. This not only would give me quite the DPS boost, but it also makes it possible to finally get some force magic. Unfortunately, I completely overlooked that in both my casual playthrough as well as in this one at the beginning, but more on that later. We also go back to the orphanage again to give Raven a status about what happened with Mangetsu. He tells us that Iron Mask seems to be hiding in Osaki Hope Towers, so the party waits until the next new moon, and afterwards we're heading into the next dungeon. Now again, there isn't really a whole lot to say about the dungeon itself. We beat pretty much everything on the way to gain a few levels. The mini-boss encounters against Mothman and friends, if you can call it that, are pretty annoying because of the MP drain, but since we only have access to tier 1 spells anyways, it's not as bad as it would usually be. We also go back to the Compsmith for a couple of more upgrades, and here is where I did another pretty heavy mistake that I didn't realize at the time. I used 2 Magnetite masses to increase the demon stock by 2, something that I don't really need at all. The remaining 2 Magnetite masses I used to gain an additional Mystique slot on both Ringo and Saizo. Had I not used the other 2 for demon slots, every party member could have gotten an additional Mystique slot, and that almost came back to haunt me, but more on that in a few. Before continuing in Osaki Hope Tower, we go back to the Soul Matrix. We still haven't beaten any of the floor 2 bosses yet. The last time we were here, we couldn't advance any further anyways, so I saved them for when my character's level were much higher to have an easier time, and that worked out pretty well. We start with Melody's floor 2 boss Kurama Tango, who is accompanied by a Kappa Tango that puts a veil on it to prevent him from getting hit with electricity weakness. Kappa Tangos are weak to physical attacks though, so they really aren't a big issue to deal with. So pretty much take out the Kappa Tangos with physical attacks, and then focus on Kurama Tango with electricity. After Kappa Tango gets resummoned, we focus down on Kurama Tango itself, since it will spawn another Kurama Tango when it gets low on HP, and there are no other enemies on the field. Oh god, so many Tangos is getting complicated. Anyways, the battle becomes a bit more tricky that way, but at least we can prevent having to start from scratch again, and the boss is already down a couple of turns later. We continue on with Aero's floor 2 boss, Archangel. Now Archangel at start is weak to gun damage, which is good. Unfortunately, every other turn he switches stances. In his shield stance, he's only weak to ruin damage, so we can't really do much. Since he also charges up though, it's best to just guard anyways, and once he switches back into sword stance, we can continue going to work, and soon after that, he's already down and out. Last up is Saizo's floor 2 boss, the combination of Jack Frost and Pyrojack. They're weak to fire and ice, and their main gimmick is that they will summon more Jack Frosts and Pyrojacks into battle, while also putting a wall on them, preventing them from being hit with their weakness. Luckily, this doesn't go for the doppelganger counterparts, so we can easily rack up Sabbaths and take them out quickly. We also make our way through all the third floors. The additional levels will come in very handy soon. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have enough soul levels yet to go for the bosses, but we'll probably get stomped anyways. On one of my ways back to refill stuff, I stopped by the mysterious woman again, and at this point I realized that I could have gotten mystiques with tier 2 spells a while ago already. This is also the reason I made a huge mistake, wasting my magnetite masses on the demon slots earlier. I could have gotten a tier 2 mystique for every party member, and then boost the magic with the corresponding elemental mystique. Not only that, but since I thought I wouldn't have access to force magic anyways, I also sold all my force mystiques. So even though I have 2 slots available in Saizo now, I can only put 1 force mystique on him, so that will be much lower DPS without the boost. And after buying the Sanma mystique, I didn't really have anything left to buy any other mystiques anymore. And now take a guess which element the next boss is weak to. Right, obviously it's force. I mean, it's nice we can finally hit the weakness at all, but that was just so unnecessary. It could have been easily avoided had I just paid a little more attention to the game. Luckily, floor 3 of the Soul Matrix gives you 2 additional magnetite masses, so at least we can get a second slot for the remaining 2 party members now, but still, that force thing still irks me to this day. Anyways, what's done is done, might as well make the best out of that situation now. Once we are done exploring all of the 3rd Soul Matrix floors, we are back to Osaka Hope Tower to continue making our way through all the way to the first boss of the dungeon. At this point the party is level 39, so we have a 4 level advantage over the next boss, the second meeting with Ash. And if you remember how brutal the first battle was, you can probably imagine that this one is not going to be any easier. This time she has a new gimmick attached, which is summoning Pazuzu. Pazuzu casts Miasma Breath on turn 1, which eats away HP of every party member at the end of the turn, so you need to take it out as soon as possibly, even more so since the miasma damage also increases every turn. This is also the reason we grabbed 5 frost epitaphs, to make sure we not only do good amounts of magic damage, but also stack up Sabbaths for some more bonus damage. Saizo continues to hit Ash with Sanma, while the rest of the party makes sure we get rid of Pazuzu just a few turns after. Once Ash hits phase 2, she summons an Inugami and a Lilim, which, just like in her previous battle, are mostly here to inflict ailments and boost her almighty attack. At this point she also starts using Spellproof wall every few turns, which is basically an AoE Makara card. While that does suck, we can use this opportunity to heal up and deal a bit of damage with physical attacks with the other party members. Ashes to Ashes doesn't deal a whole lot of damage when there are no ailments inflicted, which is nice, but the battle is still far from easy. Luckily we also stacked up on healing items before, so healing up usually isn't that big of a problem as long as we don't run out of them before the battle ends. Additionally, at this point we also have access to AoE status healing items, so the poison from Blight is not as bad as it would have been in the first fight against her. Eventually she will also resummon Pazuzu, so just like at the start of the battle, we try to take care of it as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, Saizo gets wiped the following turn, which is pretty bad timing just now. Luckily we were able to recover rather fast, and at this point Ash is already in red bar, so the fight is almost won. And just like that she wipes both Ringo and Melody the next turn, and then the other demons take care of the guys, resulting in a wipe. I knew my strategy was good enough, but it just felt like I got pretty unlucky. In order to make this more consistent, I went back to Yin Yang Palace and got myself a couple Force Epitaphs as well, to get some more damage in on Ash if needed. With those small improvements, we go back and give it another shot. Again, we take out Pazuzu as quickly as possible to avoid the majority of the miasma damage, and once we push Ash into phase 2 is where we also use the newly acquired commander skill Damage Condenser. which narrows Sabbath damage to a single target and also increases its damage. With that, we also use all of our epitaphs to get our Sabbath stack as high as somewhat possible, and the upcoming Sabbath attack does like 550 damage, which is huge, so that was definitely a good idea. Unfortunately, this also means that she summons 2 more demons right away, so now we got 5 enemies on the field, including a miasma casting Pazuzu. At this point, Ashe is already in red bar again, so it's better to just focus on her if possible and ignore the ads completely. Melody manages to survive an increased ashes to ashes. At this point, a clutch auto repair triggers, which helps out quite a bit as well. We now use stack optimization, which increases all stack gains from attacks by 1, so we get 2 stacks instead of just 1 for a weakness hit now. Hoping this would be enough to wipe Ashe, we go balls to the wall and hit every weakness we can to finish off the battle. With a stack of 7, we deal enough damage, Ashe is down, and the battle is won. Second try victory? Not even that hard if you know what you're doing. The first one felt a lot more brutal, though the new commander skills and the addition of Sanma are definitely coming in very handy here. Ashe manages to escape, and we continue making our way through the rest of Osaki Hope Tower. Again, nothing big worth mentioning here, so we skip right to the final part. Before engaging the next boss, the party is level 42, so we're now only 2 levels higher than the boss for a fight that might be among the hardest in this challenge. Anyways, we make our way to the final room, go through all the cutscenes happening, and the next boss fight approaches. Alright, there's a lot to talk about here, so let's dive right into it. Zenon starts out being weak to pretty much everything, so the goal is to get as much damage in as possible before his affinities change. Considering Zenon is probably the strongest target, we need to take care of it as soon as somewhat possible. Once he casts Contract's Ward, his affinities change where there will be 1 weakness and a repel of the opposing element, while resisting everything else. Iron Mask himself is going to summon a power first. Iron Mask's attacks are mostly gun based, but he also uses Stun Grenade, which has a high chance to paralyze the majority of the party. Unfortunately, Power puts an Abyssal Veil on Zenon, which makes him resist all elements, so we need to take it out first. Zenon itself goes for a strong AoE element attack of the element it is currently infused with, and you can see that this actually hurts a lot, and with everybody else attacking as well, we run into problems very quickly. Power is only weak to guns while resisting all elemental damage, so getting him down is a rather big issue as well. And to top it off, he can use Blast Arrow, which is a rather strong AoE gun attack, so yay, things are looking great. When Iron Mask casts Target on a party member, Zenon will follow it up with Greedy Claws. This will certainly one-shot the party member targeted with it, and yet we still guard with them because it will also heal Zenon for half the damage inflicted, and we want to prevent it from healing all too much. Watching this now, I realized I could have probably repelled this attack using a repel sticker, but this was something I never even thought about for some reason. Kinda obvious way to deal with it, considering that's how you usually do the optional Zenon fight in Soul Matrix later, but whatever. At this point I also finally started to use the Rakukaja pearls we bought way back to get our defense up and reduce the incoming damage, but at this point we have 4 enemies on the field, including a Silky that likes to heal the entire formation with media. The third summon coming into play here is Weavre, whose only weakness is Ruin, something we won't be able to hit, so yay! Generally this is becoming a huge struggle at this point since we're barely able to keep up with reviving and healing. Long story short, as much as I tried to stay in the fight, in the end it didn't even matter, and the party went down eventually. Not even to Zenon, but to Weavre. Once she gets into red bar, she will use Concentrate and follow it up with Megiddo, and this is basically RIP. Since we can't hit a weakness here, it's also rather hard to beat her before that happens, so that is something to keep in mind for future attempts. I was not really expecting to do this on the first try, but this seems to be a rather big roadblock in the way. The biggest problem was the AoE damage from Zenon, so we need to get rid of it as soon as somewhat possible. I grinded a bit more to level 43, since the one level might make a little difference as well, and also went back to Yin Yang Palace to stack up on elemental epitaphs to be able to hit weaknesses more often and therefore get a bigger Sabbath stack. You might already know where I'm going with this. We go back to Iron Mask again and give it another shot. Now with a level higher and more items in possession. Turn 1 we set up all possible buffs, as well as Secunda to decrease the enemy's accuracy. Turn 2 we use Damage Condenser and try to get the biggest stack possible since Xenon is still weak to every element at this point. Not only do we get some good damage in with our attacks, but the Sabbath afterwards does an incredible 845 damage, so we already got through a third of his HP on the first turn of attacking. Since Power will put on the Abyssal Wheel next turn, we follow it up with stack optimization to get more additional Sabbath stacks for one big attack before Xenon can't be hit with a weakness anymore. The following 10 stack Sabbath does another 400 damage and Xenon's HP is basically already halved at this point. We're off to a much better start than before. We get our buffs back up and go to work to get rid of Power so we can continue hitting Xenon again. A clutch crit from Arrow is enough to take Power out with the following Sabbath attack, so now it's back to getting rid of the most dangerous part of the fight. Again we use Damage Condenser to focus the Sabbath on Xenon, and Ringo also gets the clutch double turn. At this point, Xenon is already in red bar, so this looks very promising. Xenon now uses Feral Focus, and this is actually good to get our buffs and debuffs back up, since it would absorb any Sabbath stacks the following turn and heal his HP. The following turn, Ringo gets focused again, but in a risky move we use another stack optimization, hoping we could get enough damage in to wipe Xenon before the focused attack happens. Once again, we throw everything we have at it, and just like I hoped, it was enough to take Xenon out before the enemy's next turn. At this point, the fight isn't won yet, but it becomes a lot more manageable. We focus on hitting as many weaknesses as possible in order to build a higher stack. This time Power uses the Abyssal Wheel on Iron Mask, so again we need to get rid of it first. We also get rather lucky as nobody goes down the turn after, and we get a clutch auto repair which gives us a great opportunity to renew our buffs as well. Unfortunately, Iron Mask still wipes both Ringo and Melody the following turn, so yeah, so much for that. At this point, we also start to run out of Rakukasha Pearls, so defense buffs will no longer be a thing. Luckily we get rid of Power the following turn, so that gives us a little bit of leeway to recover and get some nice damage in. Soon after, we also get rid of Silky and the fight seems to turn into our favor. Luckily, Iron Mask summons another Silky instead of a Power, which means we can continue hitting his electricity weakness. We use another Damage Condenser and try to get as much damage on Iron Mask as possible. And just when I thought we're getting towards the end, Silky uses Diorama, and yeah, I guess we definitely need to take care of her too. At this point we also start to run out of healing items, so this may become a pretty clutch battle within the next few turns. We also get Weaver into critical, which means we will get a concentrated Megiddo next, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs, so we focus all of our attacks on her to get rid of her before that happens. Luckily the Sabbath bonus damage is enough, and at this point Iron Mask is all by himself, so he summons another Weaver. At this point I was pretty confident we'd win the battle since Iron Mask was almost down already. We throw another couple of attacks at him and the battle is finally over and won. This took forever. The entire fight lasted about 25 minutes real time and was definitely the hardest battle so far. But we beat it on the second try, so there's that I guess. Also after the battle, Vasuki maxed out and gave me an Ice Slumber mystique, which I never really noticed until way later in the game. Each element has a mystique that lets you inflict certain ailments when you hit them, in this case sleep. This is going to be pretty useful for grinding random encounters. You could buy those mystiques in Ropo Realm once you complete the Iron Mask fight as well, but at this point we haven't even gotten all the tier 2 spell mystiques yet, so it's nice getting a lucky drop here. Anyways, Iron Mask absorbs 7's Covenants, though the purple one suddenly disappears, so it seems he is missing one after all, but he still manages to escape. In the Axis, Vic tells us the Purple Covenant is actually located inside of Arrow since he was Mangetsu's former assistant and it was transferred to him. Unfortunately, this also resulted in memory loss, so now we have to recover both Arrow's memory and his Covenant in the Soul Matrix. I haven't really talked about random encounters a whole lot to this point except in the beginning of the game, since usually they weren't anything special. However, at this point of the game, those start to rack up in difficulty quite a bit. We are getting to the point where enemies start getting access to tier 3 elemental spells, and if they hit a party member weak to it, they almost one-shot them from full HP. This is not necessarily a big problem yet, but if this continues on like this, grinding might become quite a bit more of a hassle. Before fighting the boss here, we return back to stack up on items and go visit the Comsmith. At this point we can get the commander skill Shield Deployment, which might be one of, if not the most important one. It increases the defense of all party members and prevents status ailments for the following turn. And to top it off, the defense buff stacks with Rakukaja, so that is huge. With that out of the way, we return to the Soul Matrix and run into the next boss, Redra, who is accompanied by 2 succubus. While the boss itself is weak to force, the succubus can be hit with electricity, so at least stack building isn't as much of a problem here. They also like to spam acid breath to lower the party's defense and accuracy, and then inflict dread on everybody, which is pretty annoying. We use stack optimization to boost the amount of stacks, and then spam weakness hits to get a decent hit on the bonus attack. Unfortunately, I missed-targeted with Ringo and hit the boss, which repels electricity, so yay, good job me. Pretty soon afterwards, we get overwhelmed by the amount of incoming damage, and that's basically rep. After the fight with Iron Mask, I got a little overconfident and was kinda underestimating this one, thinking it will probably be much easier, but yeah, nothing easy in this challenge anymore. The party is also only level 46, which is basically the same level as the boss, so it probably won't hurt to grind a bit more. Once the party is 2 levels higher at 48, we come back and give it another shot. The start was pretty much the same as before, though this time we used the new commander skill Shield Deployment on turn 1 for the defense buff, but mostly to not get inflicted with dread on everybody. Unlike last time, we also negate the debuffs inflicted from Acid Breath with a Dekunda Pearl before going back to work on the boss. Ceodine still hits pretty hard, and Life Leech is incredibly annoying since the HP heal makes it much harder to get rid of the succubus. High Pressure could have wiped half of my party here, but luckily Arrow barely outlived it and Melody dodged the attack. When the boss used Concentrate, I thought he would follow it up with Ceodine, so I threw a Magic Mirror on Ringo. Unfortunately, he used Mazionga and wiped half of my party with only Ringo and Saizo surviving. Luckily, we still have quite a few revival beats, so recovery, while annoying and not so easy, at least wasn't impossible. Clutch Auto Repair once again coming in handy to save the fight, because I'm not sure if I could have recovered otherwise. And of course he goes for Concentrate again next turn. Since I also forgot to read my Rakukaja Pearls, I basically had no other way than to guard this with the entire party. And this actually worked out rather well. Never forget to guard everybody, this can literally save lives. Anyways, afterwards we're back to work on the boss and actually managed to get rid of the second succubus as well, so now the boss is on its own and we're on the way to victory. The boss is already in red bar and just a few turns later the battle is over and won. You can also see that my party is already 15 levels higher than my demons, and this is something I haven't really talked about much yet. Obviously the demons get much less experience once they max out on their skills, but with a lower level, they also obviously have much lower stats, which is why we're still taking a lot of damage oftentimes, even though the party outlevels the boss quite a bit. Considering every starting demon also has 2 weaknesses certainly doesn't make things any easier either. Anyways, Era starts to remember everything again and unlocks his covenant, so the party decides to go to Komodori to pay Raven a visit. The moment they meet though, yeah. Both know what's going on. Raven is actually Iron Mask, and you probably know what that means. Since they don't want to fight at the orphanage, they decide to meet at the West Shipping District for the final showdown. Before going there though, we also stop by the Comsmith again. This time we upgrade our Mystique slots from 2 to 3 slots, but only for 3 party members. Since we only have 6 Magnetite masses, Ringo still has to wait for her 3rd slot. Remember early in the game when I accidentally wasted 2 Magnetite masses to increase my max demon stock? Yeah, those would be real useful now. The West Shipping District is a rather short area, so we'll skip forward to the next important event. Since the party is only level 51 and therefore only a single level higher than Raven is, I decided to postpone him for now and do some other stuff first, like beating the floor 3 Soul Matrix bosses, starting with Asura, Melody's 3rd floor boss. Asura isn't weak to anything. Well, technically he's weak to Ruin, but we can't hit that, so that doesn't count. Since he also resists both physical and gun attacks, we throw all kind of spells at it until we hit phase 2. Luckily in the beginning Asura doesn't really hit too hard, and we're also like 10 levels higher than the bosses. After a while, Asura will start using Path of Carnage, which gives him an additional turn, but also changes his weakness. He will use that every couple of turns from that point on forward, so you want to strike him down as fast as possible. Luckily at this level, this is not a big issue, and the battle is won just a short bit later. Next up is Sandalphon, Arrow's 3rd floor boss. Sandalphon resists all elements, but is weak to guns and neutral to physical damage. He will summon a pair of principalities when there are none on the field. Since those are weak to both physical and electricity, Ringo and Melody take care of those, while the gun wielders take out Sandalphon himself. 3 turns later, the battle is already over again. Being 10 levels ahead does have its advantages for sure. Before heading for the 3rd boss, I realized I actually never got the tier 2 spells for the rest of the party, so we quickly stopped by the mysterious lady to buy the remaining 3. You cannot equip augments, boosts and bursts at the same time, which is real unfortunate since that would have been a very good DPS boost, but at least we finally have access to all tier 2 spells, so that's something. We return to the Soul Matrix for the last 3rd floor boss, Chernobog. Chernobog is only weak to force, while resisting everything else, so that makes getting damage in a little trickier. His main gimmick is to inflict the party with status ailments, most notably poison. Chernobog will also call more summons, which is actually an advantage here since both Nekomata and Mothman have their regular weakness, so getting a decent Sabbath stack becomes much easier that way. With that, we continue on doing damage, and soon after, the last boss is already down and out as well. We continue in the Soul Matrix exploring everything on the 4th floor for all party members. At this time, we don't have the necessary soul levels yet to unlock any gates, but the extra fights on the way at least give some extra experience. Seeing as the party is still at level 51, my chances against Raven at this point are probably rather low, so I figured might as well continue here for now. Also at this point, Atlas finally dropped the Soul Hackers 2 patch, which lets you auto dash and do fast battle. The auto dash wasn't even the issue since we had assassin steps before, but fast battle makes grinding so much more convenient. I actually thought about waiting with this challenge until the update is here, but since Atlas had no ETA on it, I just started it and hope they'll push it out sooner than later, so yay for that. Anyways, the party only gained a single level in the Soul Matrix while exploring, and the demons in the West Shopping District are at a higher level, so we go back to finish off the grind there. At level 53, the experience drops off pretty bad there too though, so I thought might as well try if I can beat the Strong Shadows since those are way higher leveled and should give me much more experience. Well, I think needless to say that didn't turn out all too well. Since we already were a third into the next level and now have fast battle available, I decided to grind one more level to 54 before approaching Raven, and then some more to also get our demons up to 38. If he is anywhere close to as bad as the fight with Iron Mask and Zenon was, an additional level is definitely going to help. Once that is done, we head into the last area of the West Shipping District and engage with Raven. Raven is only weak to electricity, while resisting ice and nullifying fire. Oh, and remember the Weaverhead that could wipe us in the Iron Mask fight? She is back again, as is Silky and Power. Luckily, due to the vast amount of weaknesses spread out over several demons, building a decently high stack usually isn't a big deal. This time we fend off the concentrated Megiddo with a shield deployment, but it still hits rather hard. Luckily it misses half of the party, so it wasn't even that bad to recover from. The new tier 2 spells make quite a nice difference in damage output, which makes getting rid of the adds much easier. At this point, Raven uses reactive armor, which makes him repel all elements. He will then follow it up with Purge, and depending on which element he hits, he becomes weak to said element. Unfortunately, this only works for a single attack, which I forgot at first, therefore wasting some damage by throwing an item instead of casting Agilao on the first turn. Surprisingly, the incoming damage is not as bad as I thought it would be, even without using Rakukaja Pearls. And just as I say this, he stuns everybody but Arrow and charges up for his big Aurora Blitz attack. Luckily, we can throw a pure Merida Fluid to heal everybody and use shield deployment to decrease the incoming damage. The party-wide debilitate that comes with it is easily negated with a Dekunda Pearl, and we can continue on just like before. At this point, he also starts to use Purge twice a turn, which does quite some damage to the entire party, but it also makes him vulnerable to 2 elements each turn now. Healing up now is vital. I probably should have also thrown a Rakukaja Pearl, but I got pretty lucky in that barely anybody ever went down after Raven's turn. And yeah, that is actually it for the fight. We heal, hit the weaknesses, and shortly afterwards the fight is already over and won. First try victory. I was honestly not expecting that at all, but I guess that just goes to show how much easier this challenge becomes once we get access to tier 2 spells on all party members. Fig tries to bring Raven back using a soul hack, but Raven has already accepted his fate and disappears, leaving behind all his covenants. So yeah, that's it. Well is saved, right? Of course not. This is a JRPG after all. We get called into the Axis by Ion and see that the future has now changed and that Fig is the one who wants to use the covenants to destroy the world. Tough luck, I guess. Good news though. In Yin Yang Palace, we can finally craft bead chains now. Heals were getting an issue since we haven't gotten any upgrades since pretty much the beginning of the game, but bead chains give you a full party-wide heal. One of the ingredients needed, unfortunately, is dropped by Titania, a demon that doesn't actually appear until after the next boss fight. But hey, it's some progress. The entire Axis has been destroyed by Fig, and she has set path to the 24th Municipal Tower. Good grief, those places have names. We stop by the Compsmith again, since we finally have the Magnetite masses needed to give Ringo her 3rd Mystique slot. The mysterious lady transforms again into her final form, and offers a lot of new and improved Mystiques now. Among those are ones with a new spell, which have the same potency as tier 2 spells, but can also inflict certain status ailments on a hit. The one that might be the most important one though, are the Ferocity Mystiques. Those give you a chance to crit with your magic attacks, and that is a huge boost. Not only does this double our damage, I think the multiplier is ×2, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the Summoner Skill crit stack, we can also rate our Sabbath stack by 1. So by hitting a critical weakness, we'd be able to gain 3 stacks with a single attack. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, yeah it is, but unfortunately those Mystiques cost a fortune, so we won't be getting them for a while still. Basically, the end goal is going to be the newly unlocked Mystique with the ailment tier 2 spell, the critical Mystique, and a damage increasing Mystique like an augment or a boost, which is why we want to have 3 slots on every party member. Anyway, enough talk of theory crafting, it is now time for the final dungeon of the game, and it doesn't take very long until we run into the first boss here. Being overconfident after the Raven battle, and remembering that this one was not so bad in my casual playthrough, I went in at level 55, only 1 level higher than the boss, thinking, how bad could that possibly be? And oh boy, I had no idea. This fight totally stomped me. This fight is against 2 summoners, a Dekarabia, and a Thunderbird. Turn 1 didn't even look so bad. I got an unlucky miss, but was hitting weakness as well and doing decent damage, even putting the Dekarabia to sleep. And then the enemies happened. Thunderbird spams Maziodyne, and the summoners do pretty big single target attacks, wiping both Arrow and Saizo on turn 1. And that was even with a lucky sleep proc on Dekarabia, so normally this would be even worse. So yeah, without proper strategy there is no chance to get through here. Luckily at this point of the game we can get Devotion to Keyman at the food stand, which increase experience gained in battle, so that might make grinding a bit less tedious. We go back 2 levels higher at level 57, but the results weren't that different unfortunately. This time we also use defense buff from turn 1 on to reduce the incoming damage. The main issue though is something I didn't even see in my first attempt. The Karabia will switch between using Makara Karn and Tetra Karn, and that is a problem since we have no way to generate a decent Sabbath stack. Because of this, I thought taking out the Karabia first is probably a good idea, but the incoming damage from Maziodyne, combined with high single target damage from the summoners, is still too much. Every time I was able to use magic, I tried getting a lucky sleep proc on the Karabia again, which eventually hit, and I was able to get rid of it shortly afterwards. Even with the Karabia gone though, the incoming damage was still too much and the party was wiped shortly afterwards. After 2 more failed attempts, I switched my strategy, trying to get rid of Thunderbird first since the Maziodyne is probably the biggest problem of this fight. So again we set up, now also with shield deployment on turn 1, and then go to work against Thunderbird. Thunderbird, while weak to both gun and force damage, does start out with Auto Masuko Kasha, raising the evasion of everybody the first 3 turns. Therefore, attacks miss a lot more often than they usually would. Ringo and Melody basically try to keep the party alive, while Arrow and Saizo try to get damage in. Now, the attempt I'm showing you here isn't the first one I did with the strategies, so it is still kinda luck based a little, but it's much more effective than my previous one. I also started to use a magic mirror to reflect the Maziodyne. It's not doing any damage, but it keeps the party somewhat safe. Unfortunately, you can only carry 2 of those at a time. Eventually, we were able to get rid of the Thunderbird, and at this point the battle becomes much more manageable. The Karabia doesn't attack at all, and the summoners only do single target attacks, so as long as you keep reviving, you can't really lose this battle anymore. To add to this, the female summoner goes for charge, so she only attacks every other turn at this point anymore. This gives us a great opportunity to recover and set up further. Our charged rampage slash is a guaranteed KO, but since it's only single target, it's way less worse than Maziodyne. Luckily we have a good stock of revival beats with us. Eventually we get rid of the Karabia, and at this point the battle is pretty much won. Take out the 2 remaining summoners, starting with the female one since she's already in red bar anyways, and then go on to complete the fight. This is definitely my choice for most underrated boss battle, at least in this challenge. I struggled with this one way more than I imagined at first. We continue making our way through the final dungeon, and there is actually quite some time until we get to the next boss. Because this video is already getting pretty long, we skip right to Azazel. At this point the party is at level 60, so 3 levels higher than the boss. After what happened in the previous boss fight, I feared for the worst. Azazel in the beginning of the fight is only weak to force, while repelling physical and being neutral to pretty much everything else. As always, with the help of Beast Eye, he will get to go twice each turn. His main means of damage is either big physical damage, including poison, or make it allowance, so I am ready for the worst. He also likes to buff himself with Tarokasha, which makes things even more dangerous. At some point, he starts using Law of Wisdom, which changes affinities where he now drains force, but starts to become weak to physical. Once he does that, he also starts spamming Megaten, and this hits hard. Looking at it now, I should have probably thrown a Dekasha Gem to negate his attack buffs, but whatever. He will also use Guillotine Fake, which puts all party members at 1 HP. Luckily he only uses that as a second attack, and thanks to the beat chains we have now available, we can easily recover our HP again. And then he actually double casted Megaten, and the fight that was rather manageable up until here suddenly became really dangerous. Luckily he switches affinities right after, and the commander's skill Reboot kicks in, reviving everybody. If he does that again, it's game over. Seemingly he only uses Megaten while being weak to physical, so we use that to our advantage to get everything back up and rolling again. When he switches affinities again, we already got him into red bar. This time he tries to troll by paralyzing the party and then putting them at 1 HP. Luckily Saizo goes first, and with a pure Amrita fluid we can basically get everything back up without losing any turns. At this point we also use our last beat chain, but the boss is almost down anyways. He buffs himself again and throws out another Megaten, but too little too late, and we win the fight on the following turn. Was not expecting this to be a first try victory, even less so after the mess that was the previous boss fight, but hey, I'm not going to complain at all. Since this video is getting really long at this point, we jump forward to the next boss battle because this one might take a little longer again. Once we get to level 65, we run into Husumi, one of Yatagarasu's finest summoners, and we dive right into the second to last boss fight, and this one is going to be brutal. Husumi is level 62, so we are 3 levels ahead again like most of the time. The boss itself barely ever attacks the party, but is mostly summoning more demons and buffing their stats. Husumi isn't weak to anything at all, but that doesn't really matter since we cannot directly attack the boss without all his summons going for a counterattack anyways. The strategy here is to generate Sabbath stacks by hitting the summoned demon's weakness and then smite him down with the Sabbath attacks since those are not countered. Husumi starts off with a Cerberus and a Kujulain, and we're getting decent amounts of damage in rather quickly. We can also use the Akasha Pearls to negate the buffs casted by Husumi, though I quickly realized I am better off saving those for later since you can't carry more than 5 of those at a time. Once you get him to roughly 60% HP, he switches into phase 2 and this is where the real challenge starts. He increases his action counts and starts summoning even more demons. The worst one being probably Titania, who not only casts Makarakarn regularly, but will also heal the entire enemy team using Mediarama every other turn. So the plan is to take her out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, she's only weak to physical attacks, so we are stuck with our normal attacks and can't really utilize any skills at all. Another new demon is Girimekala, and this one has both advantages and disadvantages. The good thing is that Girimekala is weak to pretty much all elements. The negative is that his attacks hit really hard, even more so when being buffed by the boss. This is also the reason I should have saved my Akasha Pearls until now. With up to 4 enemies on the field, and all of them buffed, this becomes a huge problem quickly. Even getting rid of Titania is only a temporary solution as she gets resummoned on the following turn already. Generally, having to deal with so many enemies without any AoE damage is a huge pain. Eventually we get Husumi into Red Bar, but things are not looking so hot. We barely have any Rakukasha Pearls and heals left, and are all out into Kasha Pearls as well. If it wasn't for Titania constantly healing everybody, this fight would have been long over already. At this point, we're almost done with the fight though. Something I haven't mentioned much is the seal effect on Eros Cocytus skill. This can seal both Girimekala and Cerberus and is a huge help when it comes to mitigating incoming damage, since they can only do single target physical attacks at that point. Husumi is on his last bits of HP. We managed to wipe Girimekala, and Titania sets up another Makarakarn. I'm going for Damage Condenser, hoping the Sabbath stack from the physical attacks on Titania are enough to win the battle. I even get a lucky crit with Arrow on Cerberus. Unfortunately, Titania already goes down after the first physical attack, but that doesn't matter anymore since the Sabbath damage is enough to win the battle. Phew, even though that was a first try victory, it was still quite the challenge for sure. This battle literally lasted 30 minutes real time, so I was really happy not having to attempt this again. In the meantime, we also managed to buy the remaining mystiques we talked about earlier, so now every party member has a status ailment tier 2 elemental spell with a damage boost and a critical mystique equipped. This will be our final setup in terms of mystique management. We're basically in front of the final boss now, but in order to get the true ending, we still have to do the last Soul Matrix bosses on floor 4, so let's start with those, shall we? First one up is Ero's old buddy Kaburagi. The fight is pretty similar to the story fight we had earlier on. Kaburagi starts with a Kurama Tengu and Leon Enside who puts a veil on Kaburagi to prevent him from being hit with his ice weakness. Luckily at this point we're like 15 levels higher than the boss, so it's not really a big issue. Get rid of the ads and then focus on the boss itself. With our finalized Mystique setup, we're doing lots of damage and getting high Sabbath stacks, so the battle is already over again a couple of turns later. Same goes for Melody's last boss, Iron Mask. This one is a bit more complicated because of the amount of summoned demons, but in the end, strategy was pretty much the same as with Kaburagi before. Just stay on your toes and win the fight. Since we are quite overleveled, those bosses aren't anything special. The last one still missing is Saisa's last boss, Ash. This fight is very similar to the first encounter with her, so we basically know what we have to look out for here, and again, a couple of turns later, we have already won again. So with that out of the way, the only thing left now is the final boss then. I wasn't exactly sure what level I was going to need for the final boss, so I grinded until the enemies in the last area pretty much barely give any experience anymore, which happened to be level 72. And looking at the fight, this may have been pretty ideal, but let's look into it. Once again, this battle comes in two phases, or more like two fights with several phases in this scenario. First battle starts with Cyber Ion being only weak to force, while resisting or repelling pretty much every other element. And this comes in very handy actually. The unique force spell Sanjiva from Saisa's Mystique has the ability to inflict debilitate on an enemy in case it is a weakness hit. Not only does this make her take quite some more damage, but it's also a great means of mitigation. Even more so considering Cyber Ion takes 3 actions every turn. So having her waste an action by always casting Dekunda first is already a huge help. Still, the incoming damage is pretty big, especially when she stacks up AoE attacks. Luckily, we also do decent damage, so the first part of the battle isn't too difficult. Once you get her to half of her health, she switches into phase 2 where she's summoning 4 copies of her, and while she becomes invincible herself, defeating the copies will directly damage her. Each of the copies is weak to one element, with the purple one being weak to physical attacks. This is also the one we need to take out first, since it likes to spam Makara card, making it impossible to hit any of the other weaknesses. They also like to buff themselves and heal up, so this makes it even more annoying. Luckily, they pretty much only do single target attacks, which makes healing up quite a bit easier. At some point they will also target a specific party member, which is actually rather good since the targeted member usually survives as long as you guard on that turn, and healing up afterwards is much easier as well. Once we have taken out the purple copy, we can go to work on the others using our elemental damage again. When all of them are eliminated, a single hit to Cyber Ion is enough to end the first fight. Healing here is unnecessary since the party will get a full HP and MP heal before the second fight anyways. Fig transforms, and the final part of the battle begins. At first, Cyber Ion resists everything. Luckily in this fight, she only gets 2 actions per turn, but is not weak to force from the start, so we have no way to inflict debuffs this time around. Luckily, we can still build up a small stack, since the party occasionally hits critical hits with the help of the critical mystiques. The boss will always start with Enthumesis and then debilitate the entire party. Luckily we have a few Dekunda pearls, and she doesn't debuff the party all too often. After 2 turns, she will start to use Meta Sacrament, switching her resistances, always being to 2 elements, either fire and ice, or electricity and force. She will also gain new attacks, mostly strong AoE elemental attacks of the 2 elements she currently repels, and most notorious, New World's Dawn. New World's Dawn is a very strong AoE almighty attack that will also put your party members to sleep. Luckily, this one can easily be mitigated with the shield deployment commander skill, which also prevents the party from getting inflicted with ailments. Afterwards, she will use Apostle Genesis and create a Cyber Apostle. At this point her defense goes way up, so the strategy here is to take out the Apostle and damage Cyber Ion with Sabbath attacks. The fight was looking really good at this point. Unfortunately, I missed her using Sing again and wasn't preparing for the next attack at all. And here you can see how bad New World's Dawn is if you are unprepared. Not only does it do huge damage, but it also inflicts sleep on the entire party, and at this point it's basically GG. Until the party members wake up, Cyber Ion has already taken care of the team. This could have easily been avoided had I paid more attention to the fight, but whatever, let's just try this again. Since the first fight is pretty much the same as before, we will skip forward right to the second one again. Since shield deployment needs 3 turns until you can use it again, and she seems to use sync every other turn, we have to guard this time around. Not as comfortable as using the commander skill, but the most important part here is surviving, and even more so, not getting inflicted with sleep. This time, we ran into another problem though. A few turns afterwards, Cyber Ion uses Logos Collapse, something I completely forgot about. Now you may ask, what does this do? Well, it changes the equipped demon on every party member. So basically you would have to switch everyone back. No problem, right? Well, I never got the commander skill that lets you change everyone's demon within a turn, since I thought I would never need it anyways. So yeah, this basically invalidates the battle since I can't switch back with everybody, and I'm not allowed to do anything with any other demons, so technically this counts as a loss. Because of that, we go all the way back to the Compsmith to get the last remaining commander skill, Master Commander, something I thought would be completely irrelevant. Well, turns out that was wrong. Anyways, I'm not going through the entire procedure again since the fight for the most part is the same like the previous two attempts. This time when Cyber Ion uses Logos Collapse, we can use Master Conversion and switch everyone back to the starting demons before literally doing any other actions at all, so we stay within the rules of the run and can continue the fight. At this point, Cyber Ion is already in red bar and almost done. Once the last apostle is gone, she uses Abyssal Eye, which boosts her attack even more, but makes her vulnerable to yet another element, so at this point you want to end the fight as soon as possible, because otherwise it will get ugly quickly. We use Damage Condenser one more time to get as much damage in as somewhat possible, and with a pretty high stack and a very strong Sabbath attack, we win the fight and beat the game using only the party's starting demons. Fate collapses, and since we've gotten all the requirements for the true ending, we have the option to save her. And since this video is getting far too long already, I'll try to keep it short before we end it here. This was a challenge I already wanted to do while still in the middle of my casual playthrough. I wouldn't call this game that hard in comparison to other SMT games, so this was a great challenge to increase difficulty quite a bit. Mystiques are super strong and were a necessity here, something I completely neglected in my casual playthrough for the most part because they didn't play such an important role. Anyways, I really enjoyed the challenge run a lot, and I hope all of you did well, so feel free to check out my other challenge runs I attempted if you're interested in those too. That's it for me this time, thanks for watching, take care, and I hope I'll see all of you next time as well.